Daf Lamed Vav Amid Beis will begin Daf Lamed Vav Amid Aleph, 5 lines from the bottom. Ton Rabbanon Yochel Yotze Adam Yidei Chayvasa B'Bikurim. You might think that a person can be Yotze is Chiyuv of matzah if the matzah was made from Bikurim, if the wheat or the rye was made from Bikurim, perhaps a kohen can eat that. Be Yotze is Chiyuv of matzah. Talmud Leimer B'chol Masechet Pesachim Toichlu matzahs. It says in the Torah that in all your dwellings you eat matzahs. So therefore we darshan matzah necheles b'chol Masechet Pesachim. What matzah can you be used to be Yotze Chiyuv? The matzah that's eaten in all of your dwellings. Yotzu Bikurim she'nei cholim b'chol Masechet Pesachim el Yerushalayim. That excludes Bikurim that you can't eat in all of your dwellings. You can only eat in Yerushalayim. Divra of Yosei Galili. That's what Rav Yosei Galili says, and therefore matzah that's made out of Bikurim, you cannot be Yotze Chiyuv of matzah. Rabbi Kiva says a different limud. He says matzah more. The Torah says on the Korban Pesach al matzah samraim yachlu. So we make a hekesh matzah more. Ma more she'enoi Bikurim, just like more cannot become Bikurim because Bikurim are from the Zayin Minim, and therefore Bikurim cannot be more, cannot be Bikurim. So af matzah she'enoi Bikurim. So therefore also matzah, you cannot be Yotze Chiyuv matzah from Bikurim. So Rabbi Kiva asks, maybe therefore you make a hekesh and you'll take it a step further. Perhaps you'll say, take it a step further and say, ma'amor, it's ein b'mina bikurim. There's no species that is kosher for more that is Bikurim, because Bikurim is only from the Zayin Minim, not from a min of more. So perhaps I'll say, Af matzah shein b'mina Bikurim. Perhaps I'll say that the matzah that you can be Yotze with is only something which is not a species that can be brought for Bikurim. Therefore, then perhaps I'll say that you cannot be Yotze with matzah, that has minim of Bikurim, of wheat and barley, because those are minim of Bikurim, and perhaps you can't even be Yotze with matzah from wheat and barley. So Taisus explains, perhaps therefore I'll say that matzah has to come from rye or oats or spelt, but not from chitim sarim. Some of the Meforshim have a kasha that's only so if you say that the Bikurim only comes from wheat and barley. But the Rishonim has a kasha, but according to Mandomnu say that you can come even from other minim, other grains, all the 5 minim of dogan. Then there's a problem, because then there's nothing else that matzah could come from. So that is a difficulty if you say that Bikurim comes from the chamishes mini dogan. However, if the Bikurim only comes from wheat and barley, then perhaps you'll say that matzah can only come from other minim of dogan, which are not wheat or barley, like wheat rather by oats and spelt and rye. So we learn now, you say no. Talmud Leimer matzahs riba. It says matzahs many times in the Torah, and we're marba matzahs even that come from the wheat and from the rye. The Gemara, im matzahs riba. Well, if you're saying matzahs riba, afilo bikurim nami. So then perhaps you shall say that even if it's actually bikurim, it also should be kosher. So Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva was chayzer. He was chayzer and said that einachanami. We don't learn it from that limud. Meaning, as Taisus explains, because once you're already saying that it's a riba, and that you're saying matzah riba, and you're marba that wheat and rye, which is not bikurim, well, once you're marba, then there's no reason not to be marba even further. There's no reason to make a limitation on the riba, and therefore I should be marba even actual bikurim. So maybe you'll tell me that if you're marba, actual bikurim, well, what about the hekesh between matzah and mar? As Taisus explains, no, we have other limudim for that hekesh. So therefore, once I'm saying matzahs riba and marba, wheat and barley for matzah, if it's not bikurim, well then I should also be marba bikurim as well. So therefore, this in limud is not tenable. Therefore, the Gemara says, Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva is chayzer from this limud. And we see it from the following that he retracted. We learned in the Brisa, you might think that a person could be Yaitza Masa made out of Bikurim. Talmud Leimar, Bechol, Maishveisechem, Teichel Matzahs. It says you eat matzahs in all of your dwellings. Matzah, Nechelas, Bechol, Maishavais. So it's only matzah from something which can be eaten in all your dwellings. Yatsa Bikurim, Sheina Nechelam, Bechol, Maishavais, Elav Yerushalayim, which excludes Bikurim, which cannot be eaten everywhere. It's only in Yerushalayim. So Yochel Shani might say af Meiser Sheni. You might think that I should exclude also Meiser Sheni because Meiser Sheni has to be eaten in Yerushalayim. So therefore I should exclude it from matzah. Tamalaymer matzah is riba. I have matzah riba, and I marba Meiser Sheni. That Meiser Sheni I can eat it. I can use matzah that's made out of matzah Meiser Sheni to be yaitza the mitzvah of matzah. That why do I have a limud? Why do I need a limud of matzah for Meiser Sheni? That Meiser Sheni cannot be taken out of Yerushalayim once it's brought into Yerushalayim, and it cannot be taken out and to be poided. That's a Isser D'Rabbanan. Midaraisa, even though the Meiser Sheni has been brought into Yerushalayim, you can be poided, and you can be poided and redeem it, and therefore it can be eaten elsewhere. So why do I need a limud to be marba the Meiser Sheni, the whole isser of taking it out and being paid as the Rabbana? He blies share. But here we see from Taisus weiter and Teflamed Ches that we're going according to the Mandamar, the Mechitzas Koltos Deraisa. So therefore it cannot be removed. But upon him we see over here that the Bryce is saying that Bikurim you cannot make matzah out of. Cannot be yaitza yerchiv matzah from bikurim, but Meiser Sheni you can, because we have the matzahs riba. So the Gemara Omar Ra'isa l'Rabbas Meiser Sheni lo yaitza bikurim. Well, I have a whole Meishaves which excludes, and I have matzahs which is marba. Why should I be marba Meiser Sheni and exclude bikurim? Maybe I should say fakert. Maybe just say the opposite. So marba ani Meiser Sheni, I marba Meiser Sheni. Why is that? Because sheish leheter b'chol meishavas keder belozah. Because we do find that there's a heter for Meiser Sheni outside of Yerushalayim, like we see from the following shita of Rabbi Elazar, which we'll see shortly. O Meiseni bikurim shein lo heter b'chol meishavas. But bikurim cannot be taken out of Yerushalayim, to eaten out of Yerushalayim, so there is no heter. So it's categorically asur b'chol meishavos. Therefore, the iser is for bikurim, and we say the heter is for Meiser Sheni. What is the sheet of Rabbi Elazar? The Amma, Rabbi Elazar, he says, Minayin l'Meiser Sheni shenitma. How do we know that if Meiser Sheni became tomei, shepayder noisa fil b'Yerushalayim, that you can be paided, even if it's in Yerushalayim, you can be paided. And therefore, it can be eaten, and that can be eaten outside. Talmud Leimar ki lo yisuchal seisa. The Torah says you can be paida. Now, literally means in something that is too difficult to bring up to Yerushalayim. So you can't be seisa. So then you can be paida outside Yerushalayim. But we darshan ve'ein seis says al achila. Seis can also mean achila, meaning that you can be paida something. If you can't eat it, you can be paid. Where do we see that says is lashon of achila? Shenemar v'yisa masas meiz panav. It says that legabe Yosef. It says that Yosef invited to a meal to his brothers, and he took the portions from before him. V'yisa masas meiz panav, and he gave them portions to eat. So a lashon of that. That masas esai is a lashon of eating, of portions of food, of eating. So therefore, that if you have Meiser Sheni that became tomei, you can't eat it. So if you can't eat it, then it says that you can be paided. So you can be paided. So since you see over here that Meiser Sheni there is, at least under this circumstance, there is a possibility of eating it in all your dwellings. Therefore, it's more mistaber to say that where we're mamayit from b'chol meishavas, we're mamayit bikurim, because it cannot be eaten b'chol meishavas. But Meiser Sheni, there is a hechet himsa, there is a circumstance where it could be. Like this case over here, if it became tummy, it can be pointed even Yerushalayim. So therefore, we should say that the matzah riba is to be marba meiser sheni. Now, man shamalei the Omer meiser sheni nafik bey. Who is the Tana that says that you could be yaitza with matzah made out of meiser sheni? It's Rabbi Akiva, and we see this. So this Tana must be Rabbi Akiva. Now, how is he excluding bikurim? How is he excluding bikurim? So you see, the exclusion of bikurim is from kol meishavais. It's not the hekesh matzah more. Shmami no harbe. So you see that Rabbi Akiva was chayzer from what he darshan before from the hekesh, and he does learn the exclusion of bikurim. It's from kol meishavais. Now, Rav Yossi HaGalili, why does he exclude bikurim from he excludes bikurim from b'chol meishavos? Typically, milechem oini. Why can't you exclude it from lechem oini? Misha nechal ba'oini, which is therefore excludes something that's nechal ba'oini in aninus yatzazeh she'ein nechal ela b'simcha. So why doesn't it exclude this over here, which the bikurim has to be eaten b'simcha? It has to be eaten b'simcha, and it cannot be eaten with aninus. So we say that it's lechem oini. That means, therefore, that matzah is something which can be eaten. This matzah can be eaten by an oinen. But bikurim cannot be eaten by an oinen. It has to be eaten b'simcha. So why isn't that a reason to exclude bikurim from matzah? That matzah cannot be made of bikurim. The Gemara answers, like Rabbi Shimon. He holds like Rabbi Shimon that bikurim could be eaten by an oinen. This Tanya, because we learn in the Brayso, bikurim asrim lo oinen, bikurim asrim, but Rabbi Shimon matir. Rabbi Shimon says that it's mutter. So therefore, he holds that it could be eaten by an oinen. Therefore, the exclusion cannot come from lechem oini. It has to come from b'chol meishavos. So what is this machlokes? So now the Gemara is analyzing this machlokes, whether bikurim can be eaten by an oinen or not. An oinen person, Rahman al-Slan, it's the day that one of his krivim were nifter. So can it be eaten by the oinen or not? My time at the Rabbanan, what's the reason that the Rabbanan say it's also to an oinen? It says that you cannot eat in your sharecha, in your cities. So it says, the Meiser, the Garucha says also Trumas Yadcha. V'Amar Mar Trumas Yadcha el Bikurim. What does it refer to? Trumas Yadcha is Bikurim. So therefore, we see it says in the pasuk that you can't eat in your cities Meiser and Bikurim. So there's a hekesh between Meiser and Bikurim. So therefore, the itkish Bikurim Meiser. Ma Meiser also loinen, just like we know that Meiser is also to an oinen. It says beferish in the pasuk le'achalti ba'oinim imenu. So therefore, apikurim also loinen. Rabbi Shimon says it's mutter bikurim is mutter to noin. Why is that? Because truma karin rachmana. The bikurim is called in the pasuk trumas yad, so it's called truma. Ma truma muteris loinen, just like we know that truma is mutter to noin. How do we know that truma is mutter to noin? As Rashi brings down the Gemara in Yavamas, because it says a second time it repeats that it's also to azar. So that we learn out it's also to azar. It's mutter to a kohen. It's mutter to a kohen even if he's a noin. So therefore, since we have a hakish between bikurim and to truma, so ma truma muteris loinen, not bikurim muter loinen. Now, frankly, more of Rav Shimon the hekesh lesle, even though he doesn't hold of the hekesh bikurim to meiser sheni, and therefore we say that you can't learn out from there that it's also to an oinen, but nevertheless you should learn out that it's also in any event because simcha miyah mechta ksiva. It says in the bikurim, it says regarding the bikurim, it says simcha d'ksiva samachta b'chol ha'toiv. It says you rejoice b'chol ha'toiv. So bikurim is simcha. So therefore you can't be in a matzav of tsar to an oinen. It's also to an oinen. The more answers no. That's not teaching you that simcha that it has to be eaten dafka by a person who is besimcha, that's not excluding an oinen. Hahul is zman simcha u'da'asa. It's telling you that bikurim is brought during the time of simcha, the harvest season, which is the time of simcha. This non me'atzeres v'rachag me'bikir. From Shavuos until Sukkot is the time of bringing the bikurim, and you can also recite the parasha. Recite the parasha of bikurim, Arami Ovid Avi. From Sukkot to Chanukah, maybe Venekar. It's you bring the bikurim, but you don't recite the parasha since it's not available in the fields. It's not available to all the chayas and to the behemoths. So therefore, you do not recite the parasha. So this is teaching you that the bikurim is brought at that point of the year, during those seasons. But it's not telling you that it's brought at a state of simcha. Therefore, it does not exclude an oinen. Ton rabbanan lechem oini. We darshan lechem oini. So it's prat lecholot v'la ashisha. It excludes cholot, that matzah cannot be cholot or an ashisha. So it excludes cholot. What is cholot? So it's scalded. Literally means it's scalded. The Ramban explains that it's flour that before you knead the flour, you scald it. You put it in boiling water, you scald it, and then afterwards you knead it, and that makes into a very fine quality of flour, high quality of flour, and a very high quality of matzah. So that's not called lechem oini. That's not a poor person's bread. That's a refined bread. That's a wealthy person's bread. So it's not lechem oini. The Baal Mor brings down that from Rabbeinu Ephraim. He brings down a different shot is that before you bake it, it's fried. That he says that it's fried with oil or honey or wine, and then after that it's baked. So again, that's not a lechem oini. That's not a poor person's bread. That's very high quality, very refined. So therefore, we exclude this type of. It has to be lechem oini, prat lecholot rather, and v'la ashisha, and it excludes an ashisha. As we'll see, an ashisha is a very large loaf. It's a huge quantity, and that's something that's very choshev. Something that's choshev is not called lechem oini. So prat lecholot v'la ashisha. So so therefore lechem oini, that you might think, well, he can only have it from very coarse flour, coarse matzah. Talmud Lemer, matzahs riva. We have matzahs said several times. Matzah were marbe. It doesn't have to be hadro dafka, but it can't be very choshev. Va'afilu kematzah shel shleima. So you might think, therefore, matzahs riba. It doesn't have to be coarse flour. It can be even the best, even the matzah of Shlomo HaMelech, the ashiras, the high quality that he had by the Sudas. You might think that you're going to use even the highest quality. So you can mount a lechem oini. And what are you going to learn from lechem oini? It says it has to be lechem oini. So therefore, prat l'chol v'la ashisha. It doesn't have to be hadra, but it can't be cholot or l'shisha. Umay mashma da'ay ashisha lishon the chashivusa. Where do we see that this is a lashon of chashivus? Ashisha d'chsiv. It says when Dovid HaMelech brought the Aron HaKodesh, brought it to Yerushalayim, they made a big simcha and he gave matonis to everybody. So it says in the pasuk, "Vayachalek l'chol am l'chol aman Yisrael me'ish v'ad isha." He gave to everybody, from a man to a woman, le'ish chalash lechem achas ve'esh bar echad v'ashisha echad. That's what he gave to each one of them. V'omer Rav Chanan bar Abi said, "What is an eshbar? Is echad mishisha b'par. It is 1/6 of meat from a pot." So he gave him that measure of meat. And ashisha echad mishisha beifa, and he gave them a loaf of bread baked from flour, which was echad mishisha, 1/6 of an ephah. And he says that, so therefore you see that it's a choshev lechem. It's something that's very choshev. No, pliga de Shmuel, but that argues with Shmuel. The Omer Shmuel, he says ashisha garba chamra. So that explanation of ashisha, that argues, is what that Shmuel said, that ashisha, it says that ashisha is echlemi ashisha v'par. It argues with Shmuel, who says ashisha garba d'chama. He says that ashisha is a garba d'chama. It's a jug of wine. Tersiv avahoye ve'ashisha anovim. and those who love the shisha of grapes of anovim. So therefore he says that this is a different explanation, and where he says that shisha means is referring to a jug of wine. So but al kol panim, we see over here that the lechem oini, does not have to be coarse, but it cannot be something which is choshev, because the matzah is lechem oini, it cannot be something of very great chashivos.